Hi and welcome to this video. I'm going to show you how you can use flows to create an incident in ServiceNow when a vulnerability is created in AttackForge. Flows is a new module in AttackForge which is purpose-built for automations and integrations. The example we're going to use in this video can be found here on the support site, so you can follow along and see all the scripting and information that we're going to go through as well. Separately, if you go to our GitHub repository for AttackForge, you will find this example is available in the ServiceNow folder. So you can download the flow from here and import it into your own AttackForge. And that's going to save you a lot of time and effort in setting up your initial integration. And you can always adjust the flow itself to match your ServiceNow needs. So let's start by taking a look at this flow in action. So we're going to start with, on our AttackForge project, creating a new vulnerability. So here we're going to search our write-ups library for an existing write-up for what we found. And in this case, let's go ahead and select this one. And we'll also go ahead and assign some of those affected assets as well. And we'll go through and create this vulnerability and give this a second to run and refresh. And we'll see now that this vulnerability has been exported to ServiceNow. So we'll see the incident number is now showing on the vulnerability page itself. And if we open up ServiceNow and give it a refresh as well, we'll see that that incident's being created. And if we open that up, we'll see all of this key information that's come across from the AttackForge vulnerability. So let's take a look at this a little bit deeper and see what's happened. So within the flows module within AttackForge, we can see I have a flow here to create a ServiceNow incident, and we're going to open that up. And we'll see that there's been a run that just happened within this flow, and this is the run that relating to creating that incident that we just saw moments ago. So let's open that up and take a look. So this flow is comprised of two actions. The first action is used to create the ServiceNow incident. The second action is used to tell AttackForge what the ServiceNow incident number was that was created, and then set that on the vulnerability, so we can use that for filtering, searching, reports, or any other purposes that we need as well. For each of these actions, we can look at what the data was sent to ServiceNow. So here we can see the URL that we were interacting with on the ServiceNow side, as well that it was a post request, and we can see the body of or the information that and details that we sent to ServiceNow. So here we can see the description of what we wanted to create, as well as some of the other ratings. We can also see the headers that were sent to ServiceNow as well. ServiceNow responded with a 201 status code, which is generally a good sign. And we can see here in the response body that all of that key information showing that there's an actual incident that's being created, and we can find all of that information that we sent across should be reflected here as well, which is great. Separately, there are also logs if you do need information as part of your logging and debugging. So you can use AFScript to set up different types of logging, which you can also show as part of that as well. If you're building flows for the first time, highly recommend to check out AFScript, which is going to be very useful as part of building out the logic for your flows. So let's take a look at how this flow is being configured. So we're going to edit the flow, and the first thing you'll notice is that this flow's set up to run on a vulnerability created event. Now we can also switch it to a vulnerability updated event if that's a sort of preferred integration path, and you can create your own logic into what conditions need to happen in order for this vulnerability to first be considered to go to create an incident. But in this example, we're keeping it very simple. So in the first action, we've given it a label of create_snow incident, and we know that it's going to be a post method and pointing to this particular URL. We know that because looking at ServiceNow's documentation for tables, we can see that's the one that we need to use for incidents. ServiceNow does also have its own REST API Explorer inside the app. So if you go into all and search for REST API, you'll find ability to access that Explorer. So you can also do some test requests in here as well, and just make sure you're familiar with the ServiceNow API. So coming back to AttackForge, we know ahead of time what URL we're going to use, so we can set that within this part of the action, as well as the method, and also the headers that we need to send. So ServiceNow is expecting a content type to be set as application JSON, so we can go ahead and set that here in our action. And separately, the accept header, as well as the authorization token as well. So we've set that up to be a secret. AttackForge does support secrets in flows. So in this case, I've set up the AttackForge API key and also the Snow key as well as two separate secrets that we're going to refer to as part of our request script. So let's open the request script and take a look at what we have. So the first thing we'll notice is that this is using AF script. So again, do recommend going and reading more about AF script to understand how you can create your own logic as part of your scripts in your flows. So what we'll notice, the first thing we're doing here is extracting the vulnerability project ID. So because this vulnerability belongs to a project, and later on in the next step of next action in this flow, we're going to update the vulnerability. We need to know which project it's on and use that data. So we've declared a variable here and gone through and retrieved that information from the vulnerability. You'll notice here on the right hand side we have a test context, and this is really some test information about what a vulnerability created event would have. So this is now some information about a vulnerability. It has key information relating to the vulnerability, its assets, its project data, custom fields at all different levels, including the write-up and anything else that we need as well. If we needed more data, we could always query the AttackForge self-service API as a precursor to this particular action, and we could always retrieve that extra information ahead of time and pass it into our flow as needed. But in this case, we already have all the key information we need about the vulnerability, so we don't need to do any of that. So what we're checking is making sure we're finding the AttackForge project ID, and if it doesn't, if we don't find it, having some error handling there to abort the flow and include an error message as well for debugging. However, in a success, we would have a return statement that has information that we want to pass to our next part of the action, which will be the response that comes back from ServiceNow. So what we want to do is pass along the AttackForge project ID and also the vulnerability ID. And we can see here we can access the vulnerability ID directly from within the data because that's already known ahead of time as well. The request will have a body, and this body is what we're going to send to ServiceNow. We've built a function just to make it easier for this purpose of this script, and this function is to build the request body. And if we have a look at how this function works, it starts by creating a new object that we're going to call body and start adding information to that. So what we're doing is we're, in this case, adding a short description, and the short description here in the ServiceNow world is this particular field. So we're going to map the vulnerability name directly to this short description, and that's what we've done here by assigning the short description with the vulnerability title. The next thing we want to do is assign a priority. Now, your ServiceNow configuration is most likely going to be different to what we can see here, and that's okay. ServiceNow is a very highly configurable system. So again, we do recommend checking with your ServiceNow configuration just on what the relevant priorities and other ratings are. But in this case, we're using the values of 1, 2, and 3. 1 being anything that's critical or high, 2 being a medium, and anything that's lower informational being set as a 3. And that will directly relate to what we're seeing here within ServiceNow as well, relating to these urgencies, having the 1, 2, and 3 for high, medium, and low. Now, similarly, I'm passing along impacts and urgencies. Again, this will all be dependent on how your ServiceNow is configured. So we want to also send a description, and the description is going to have the key information about the vulnerability itself, which assets are affected, information about the vulnerability, any scoring coming across from CVSS, attack scenarios, remediation recommendations, steps to reproduce or POCs, tags, and anything else that you would want to send across. So here in our request script, we are going through and really just collecting all of that information. For example, here going and extracting the CVSS scores from the vulnerability tags, and going ahead and setting all this information directly on the description. Towards the bottom, we'll see here that once our description is complete, we're going to return the body. So that's going to have all of that information that will be the payload that will end up getting sent across to ServiceNow. So now that the request is ready and will be sent to ServiceNow, a response will come back from the ServiceNow server. And we're going to have some error handling here just to make sure that that the incident was created successfully. So the first things we're checking for here is the content type headers, making sure that we have some information here in the right format that we can pass and read from, in this case application JSON. The response object itself is made up of a status code, headers, and body as well. So what we're looking for here is a result that has a system ID or sysID. So this is the ID of the incident record within ServiceNow. Now again, you can experiment with the API and read some further API documentation from ServiceNow to familiarize with what to expect within the response. And so assuming that we've got the right information, so this is all error handling, and we can see that we're using AF scripts logger to log out any error information to help us with debugging if there's any issues when this flow runs. But at the bottom, assuming we've got all that information, we now know what the AttackForge project ID is, the vulnerability ID. This was all passed in from the request script. And separately here, we now know the ServiceNow incident number, which is coming across from the body itself. The body result object from the response from ServiceNow. So we're going to pass this information to the next action within Flow, and that is to update the AttackForge vulnerability. Now on the AttackForge side, we can see here that we have a put request, but we don't know what the URL is going to be ahead of time. And that's because in AttackForge, we include the vulnerability ID within the URL. So Here we can see in the self-service API that the required URL to update the vulnerability needs the ID of the vulnerability. So for that reason, we're going to dynamically set the URL within our script. But we do know that AttackForge will require a content type header, and we can go ahead and set that here as application JSON. And we also know that AttackForge will also need a self-service API key. So we can go ahead and also set that here, again using the secrets that we've created a little bit earlier. So let's take a look at the request script. Now, the request script is checking to make sure we have that ServiceNow incident number, that we have the vulnerability ID, and also the AttackForge project ID. If we don't have any of that information, again, it's going to terminate the flow in an error condition and include some information there to help with debugging and troubleshooting later on. But assuming we have all that information, we can then return a successful request. So here we're going to define the URL. We know what the domain and path is for updating the vulnerability, and we can dynamically add the vulnerability ID to the end of that. So it matches what the API is expecting. Separately, we then need to pass in a body to tell AttackForge what we want to change. We do need to pass in a project ID, and that again is what we should already have access to. And then we can also include the custom fields that we're changing. So in the configuration for this example, I've set up a section on my vulnerabilities called integrations, and within integrations I've created a field called ServiceNow incident number, and this is going to be used to capture and track the ServiceNow incident number for all my for the incidents that get created within ServiceNow. So we can then go ahead and match the incident back to the corresponding vulnerability in AttackForge. So the key that the AttackForge key that I'm interested in is this one, Snow incident number. So in our custom fields, we can say, let's update the Snow incident number AttackForge field with the value that comes back from that previous action in the first step, which was going and creating the Snow incident. Now, assuming this is all successful, we can see here in the response script that the information that comes back from the AttackForge server is hopefully going to be a 200 status code from the server with a result indicating that the vulnerability has been updated. And if that's the case, then we can go ahead and finish the flow, as nothing further is needed at this point. Otherwise, this is all other error handling that we have. So that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.